Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's free webinar series, Maximizing Data Quality for Value and ROI, Visualizing Data Lineage with ERwin Data Modeler and Web Portal. Kevin Askew, Director of Sales from TechXtend, and today's agenda will include a brief overview of TechXtend, followed by today's webinar, hosted by Victor Rodriguez, Data Management and Data Warehousing Consultant here at TechXtend. We'll also have a questions and answers period, followed by a summary. TechXtend has a legacy history of being the source for developer and database tools for over 30 years, and also formerly known as Programmer's Paradise. Today, under TechXtend Solutions Focus, we have our legacy software developer and database tools business, with the addition of virtualization and cloud computing, storage and data management, business intelligence and information management, mobile device management, and license management. Our data modeling credentials include being a leading e-seller of developer and infrastructure tools under our database worldview ecosystem. We are an elite CA partner and the #1 data modeling reseller in North America. We have a dedicated CA sales and engineering team led by Victor, and also database modeling and infrastructure design and training services are offered. We are the leader in delivery of CA education in North America and an authorized VET VSA partner. ERwin falls under our industry-leading database tools worldview, which covers end-to-end database infrastructure needs. Now, without any further ado, I will turn things over to Victor for today's webinar. Victor?
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody, again for joining. And I do believe I have control of the slides here now. So today's topic, we're going to be looking at exposing data lineage from using the ERwin tool into the web portal. So for those not familiar with the web portal software, we'll be showing it in a little more detail later on, but I actually had a webinar a couple of months back now at this point, I believe, that introduced the web portal. It's simply a web-based method of getting your ERwin metadata information out to your end users outside of ERwin. So just kind of a convenient way of publishing this out via any kind of web browsing tool. And what we'll be looking at today is one of the key features there is data lineage. So we want to actually be able to see that flow of data between different models. So, where is my data coming from my source system to my staging area through to my data warehouse, for example. Or maybe alternately, we're looking at the flow of data from a conceptual model through the logical model and then to multiple physical implementations. So we're going to talk about that in much more detail today. So the agenda for today, we'll be looking at those two different types of data lineage. As I mentioned, this is going to be mostly demo, by the way. So once we get out of this slide, I'm going to be demonstrating all of these features. And first of all, design layers. So I'm going to introduce everybody to this topic. It's something that was introduced quite some time back. So even those of you who are still using ERwin 7, you'll be able to take advantage of the features I'll introduce here today. And then data sources for dimensional models. So I'll show you that as well. Actually have webinars on both these topics in much more detail. So if you're interested in the web portal functionality or implementing some of these design layer features and some of these data sourcing features, there are earlier webinars available in this series that cover those topics in much more detail. Then, of course, we have this open it up to questions at the end. This will just be, text-based, so please ask your questions, I should say, in the Q&A field down to the right. If I do happen to see them as they come in, I'll try to answer them right away. If not, I will answer them at the end of the presentation. So let's go into these topics of design layers and data sources, and then how to actually create these structures in the ERwin diagram. So let me share my desktop. And get my ERwin up and running. Okay, so two key features here is looking at this first point we're going to look at is actual design layers. So design layers is simply, what we've considered in the past. Many of you may not consider it this way, and it might just been something that you have considered in the past, where you basically take a model and you are simply, opening a model, or I should say deriving one model from another model. So maybe you've split a logical and physical model, and maybe you've derived one model to another. So that's basically what we talk about when we discuss this concept of design layers. So let me show you where this is available within the ERwin software in a particular model here. I'm just going to open a sample model up for us to look at. And then look at the features that are available from the context of design layers. So just waiting for this model to open for some reason. It's taking quite some time. And the WebEx sometimes causes my environment to, here we go. I was actually going to exit out of the WebEx and come back in, because sometimes it does slow down the performance of the software. Here we go. Okay, so this is just the ERwin eMovies model, which you've probably seen in the past, probably pretty familiar with this. This is just a slightly revised version of it in ERwin 8, but we kind of see this kind of sample exercise model has been available in ERwin for quite some time. So the concept of design layers. So what features are available in the context of design layers? From the Actions menu, from design layers, we have the ability of add a model source, linking a model source using a sync. This is when actually after models have already been derived, and then deriving a new model and then splitting the model. So let me start with the most basic of these. Splitting a model, this is the ability of simply taking a logical physical combined model and then breaking it up into a logical only model and a physical only model. So that's a splitting tool. Deriving a new model is pretty straightforward, exactly as it sounds. You have the ability of creating another model from an existing model. So this can be a logical model that derives another logical model. Maybe you're starting from a very conceptual design to a more granular logical design, or this could be like a logical to physical, for example. Maybe we have a logical design and now we're going to actually do a physical implementation, or maybe a logical to physical that we may even be deriving from another logical to physical model. Maybe I like maintaining my logical and physical models in one single model, but I need to actually create a SQL Server version of this model and also like an Oracle version of the model. Then I actually have that flexibility. So of course I can actually specify what type of model I want and then the target database for that. I'm not going to go into this in tons of detail. I'm just going to introduce these topics. Like I mentioned before, there's actually a webinar that goes into the actual process in much more detail. But this is just the features that are available. You have the ability of creating these derived models from one to another type of model. When you actually have created the derivation of one model type to another model type, you then have the ability of synchronizing these models after the fact. So this is another key feature of the design layers of having this within the context of ERwin, is that, for example, if you take a logical only model and you derive the physical only model, you may have changed data types, you may have changed the physical name on these objects, but you still want to be able to synchronize it where the tool, or ERwin, the modeling tool itself, understands that this physical model, even with a very different physical name, is actually correlated to this logical design element. And ERwin can do that, maintain that relationship after the derive. You simply use this sync option, which is grayed out right now because this is not a derived model. But this is how you actually synchronize your models after the fact. And this is in the context of the ERwin software itself. So splitting the model, the first tool, or the first tool that I mentioned here from this available options, splitting a model, simply taking a logical physical combined model, breaking it into a logical only and physical model. Deriving a model, like I just showed you a moment before, the ability of taking an existing model and deriving any other separate type of model from it. Now these last two features I'm going to introduce now are ones that I want to introduce specifically in the context of what we're going to be talking about today, because of the fact that oftentimes I've talked to customers and they basically say, I would like to see this lineage in my diagrams. I would like to have that relationship between the source and target object, when I actually have these models that I've created. However, I didn't derive initially. So now I have these two independent models, and basically I'm correlating these objects across those models using a spreadsheet or something like that. That's not necessarily something that's required. What you can do is you can actually add a model source, and when you add a model source, it simply means you're going to take the contents of the other model and bring them all into your current model. So perhaps you have a model that you have all of your domain definitions in. Maybe you have certain modeling behavior in that other model that you'd like to bring into this particular model. Maybe you have UDP definitions that you have defined and you'd like to add them. And maybe this is a model you reverse engineered and you didn't actually remember to bring in all those other reusable objects. So you need a convenient way of actually bringing that in, and you think you kind of missed your opportunity. If you add model source, you can actually bring that model in and all that behavior. More importantly, we'll see that data lineage when we go into the web portal, which is the second part of our demo today. So add model source, you can always add this after the fact. You just reverse engineer a model. You have subject areas you always reuse. You have particular display levels that you like to use over and over again, and you have a very bland reverse engineered model. How do you bring in that reusable model? Use the add model source. Second feature here, link model source. Now this is a very powerful feature. What this actually allows you to do is to take any two standalone models. I can take this existing model here. I can actually go here and actually load an eMovies model. Let's say that I actually have an eMovies model that I reverse engineered from a physical system, which I actually do have. And we see it back here. So it has some new objects. It has some existing objects. It just has this black and white display. But it has some of the same objects that exist in my current design model. So I actually want to take this current model and I want to link it, which is what we're doing here. We want to actually link some of the attributes in this model to my current model. So the way I can do this is just take any two standalone models. I actually, you have the same granularity you would have in a complete compare, in being able to resolve these conflicts and filter down on what you'd actually like to include as part of that linking process. You can see you can actually filter objects out to make this simpler. But when I actually click Finish, in this particular case, a lot of these objects are going to automatically align themselves because ERwin does try to align these objects based on their names. So for example, we see that there are annotation objects that are in my design model that are not in the reverse engineered model, which we would expect to see. That's not surprising. But we see that there are, for example, current user has a different body. Session user has a different name between the two models, but they actually have the same value. And we have other values here. Again, this is at the default model level. But more importantly, let's go down to the table level. And we see, for example, that we have this DBO department table, which doesn't exist in my design. And we have this employee table, which actually I want to correlate it to this employee table here, all caps, without a schema owner specified. And I want to create a linkage between these two models. So I actually have the ability here of match two items. I'm going to match those up. And we see that some of these tables have different abbreviated names, but this employee address 2 actually correlates to this EMP address 2 table in my physical model. Once again, I want to match those to each other. So what I'm doing here, by the way, and once again, I have more information on this on that previous webinar, what I'm doing is selecting an object from the list, clicking on match two items, and then simply selecting the other match item. And that window that pops up is asking me if I'm sure that I want to correlate these objects. You can unmatch objects, by the way, after they've been aligned. You can do an unmatch. But obviously, in this particular case, I'm actually trying to create matches. Here's my employee number, correlating my logical and physical design, employee phone number, employee address as well. And you'll notice that the rest of these, salary, hire date, automatically ERwin uses name matching, so these have automatically been synchronized across my two models. So now that I've actually aligned these objects to each other, and you could do this all the way down the line, like we see we have some other tables here as well that need to be correlated, like the payment table and store and others as well. So we could go down the line and do this. We could do this all at once, or we could do it granularly. But actually, we're going to click Finish here at the end. No differences. No, I can ignore those. And now the key point here is that in our model, we've actually created a relationship to the other model. So this is in the original model here. Once again, I've actually created a model source. Now, automatically, this source is created, and the alignment that I've created between these two unrelated objects, or unrelated models, I should say, are now correlated here. And now by creating this relationship between these models, there's two benefits here. In the future, like we've mentioned in the past, you have the ability at any time now of doing a sync with model source. You'll notice this is no longer grayed out. I can synchronize my two models. I do not need to manually align those logical to physical name mappings, different data types, et cetera, and so forth. Everything that I've correlated once, ERwin is maintaining that correlation. I don't have to go and build this all over and over and over again. We do it once, and then ERwin maintains that relationship. You can even rename the object names. ERwin will continue to maintain those relationships. They're based on the unique identifiers, the UIDs on those objects themselves. So a really powerful way of creating those relationships between your models, of being able to synchronize without having to manually synchronize in the future. But more importantly, when we get to the web portal piece of this demonstration, you're going to be able to see the data lineage from one model to another. What is the relationship between this attribute and that column, and how do I distribute that to the rest of my team members? So we'll see that later on. So this is the first type of relationship we're looking at creating in our models. How do I add model source, link model sources, sync those model sources in the future, derive a new model, and then split models? And this is all the topic of design layers. So that's topic number one. The second topic I want to talk about is defining data sources in a dimensional model. So the first thing I want to point out here is to enable the features I'm going to show you right now, you need to do a few things in your model. So the first thing is in your model properties, you need to turn on the data movement option here, this checkbox. So once again, this is when you go to your model, model properties, and you have the ability of specifying in the general tab that data movement is enabled. So by enabling data movement, you actually are going to be able to define data sources, and that's what we're going to be looking at in more detail for the rest of this exercise. You can also define a model as dimensional here as well, and in this particular case, this is a dimensional model, but you can add data sources even for non-dimensional models. So that's important. I want to make sure to make that clear, but even if you are using a non-dimensional model, you can still use data sourcing. And all you need to do is just remember to turn on this checkbox for data movement. So what does data movement allow you to do? It adds a tab in your column properties for data sourcing. So once again, what I just showed you there, in the column properties, you'll notice we have a data source tab. Now you can define data sources at the model level, model data sources, and I'll show you how to define that in just a moment. And then you attach those data sources at the column level, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment as well. You can also do it in the Model Explorer. You'll notice that because I've enabled data movement, I have the ability of creating data movement rules. So these two features here, data movement sources and data movement rules, are enabled once again from this model feature here, model properties, data movement. This exists also in the 7.x, so if you're still using ERwin 7.x, feel free to enable that. I know many users oftentimes are not aware that that feature is there, so it's something that's useful to keep in mind. So now that we've enabled data movement, we allow us to create data sources. What does that actually mean? Let me show you some data sources we've previously created and show you what you can do with this. So once again, I create a data source. I'm going to create a new one. In this particular case, I'm just going to call it inventory 2 or something like that to simplify the this behavior. Oh, my display is frozen. Let me just exit out of this sharing and make sure I can get this to work. I'm going to go back and share my desktop again. So once again, we go from our model, we're going to go to data sources, and when we define a new data source, you actually have the ability of defining properties for this particular data source. So it creates a generic data source object name. You can rename this if you need to. You actually have the ability of specifying what your source system is. It could be Oracle, for example. In this case, it really doesn't matter, and you put in your host DBMS information. It actually doesn't matter what you specify here, to be honest with you, mostly for reporting purposes. You can populate this as you see fit, and you can specify like your database type and things like that here as well. But the reality is that this is actually just string information. What really matters is how we actually import these object information. So I actually have the ability of importing. You can actually manually create just a list of tables, for example, if we want to. And you can actually import them from a CSV file if you just have a tabular report of table definitions and attribute definitions. But much more powerfully, and that's what we're kind of really drive home here, is to use existing designs, right? So I already have built an ERwin diagram that contains that data source information, right? I've captured it within an ERwin diagram. How do I map that relationship to this data source from that other model? So the way I do that is, once again, I've created this data source. I am now going to click on this import other. And we'll see, just like we've seen before, this is very similar. Anybody who's done a reverse engineer in the past or a complete compare, you're very familiar with this dialog. It basically allows me to connect to either a reverse engineered database, which is the default here, or an ERwin file, or a file that happens to be in my MART. So I can connect to an individual file, for example. I can click the load button. And if I click load, I can actually go to take an actual file here. I can take, for example, my inventory data source file here. I can select that. And it's just upgrading this model to version 8. It was actually 7.x model in this particular case. And what I actually can do here, it's very similar to what we saw also in the design layers examples that I showed before. I actually have the ability of clicking import here. And what you'll notice is you can actually import different data sources here. So now these data sources, I'm not actually going to import, unlike when we've seen this editor in the past, I'm not importing like the product table as an actual table into my model. I'm importing the product table, which is what I just did right there, by the way. I'm actually importing the product table as a source, as an available source for my dimensional design. So once again, I'm going to select product here. I can either ignore or import this product location. I'm going to ignore it for now. I'm going to click finish. Oh, finish. And now we see that I've actually brought in this product table into this new data source. Now back in my data warehouse sample, what I actually have the ability of doing here is within a particular column, I can actually attach that data source. So I can actually go to my source selector, and you'll see that I actually have, the sales and the inventory data sources which were created before we began our exercise, and then this new data source one that I just created right now. And you'll see that the product table contains this product information. So I can actually go and take this information here and add it to a particular case. In this case, I wouldn't necessarily want to do this in the dimension, the store dimension, but let's say I want to do this in the product dimension. And I can actually look at my new data source that I just created, and then if I select here the product as here, I should say, if I go here, I should say, and I go to product, and I can select, maybe I'm going to collect this product dimension ID is actually going to be, maybe it's going to be calculated based on product number and product category, let's say. So now I've included those objects here as source objects. I can then put here, my data source comment can actually be transformational logic. So maybe I can actually just explain what the transformation will be to make this data source or use the data source columns, product category and number to calculate this dimension ID number, this dimension key, and it can be calculated based on that information. So I actually can put that information here. Now, what's the value of putting this in your model? It becomes one place to actually, define the source information. It becomes a place to document that, where users can easily come and run a report and get that information out. And you can actually run this report once we get into the web portal as well. But also what we're going to see in the web portal is we're going to be able to actually visualize the relationship between that target and source system. So two types of data lineage that we're talking about here. One is deriving a model. It's the standard ERwin design layers, deriving one model from another. Maybe we have conceptual to logical to multiple physical designs. Another being this data, adding data sources to existing columns in the dimensional model to show the relationship between those source and target systems. Now, how do we visualize that? Well, we've done the groundwork. There's absolutely value to this inside of ERwin itself. We have the ability of running reports. We have the ability of creating a central location for creating the relationships between those diagrams, but how do we actually visualize them? That's where the web portal comes in. So let me actually go to the web portal tool. Kind of a preview of things to come there. I'm going to actually log out and start over. I'm going to start another session and go to the same web portal. I'm actually going to log in as just a generic user. Take a look at a particular example here. So for those of you not familiar with the web portal, this just launched relatively recently. It is a metadata management repository for your ERwin metadata. Has not yet scaled out to include other metadata types, but there are strategies around that, so contact me if you're curious about that. But if you are already maintaining a lot of your design in ERwin diagrams, it's a very simple way of getting this in front of your application team, your business analyst team, anybody who currently might just be using ERwin Navigator, but maybe they don't use it that much because they don't really know how to use ERwin's interface. Just a convenient way of getting that information out in front of people. So let me show you an example here. This is just running in a browser. There's no special software required to run this. And what I've done is I've actually published some models here previously. So I have a collection of models, and I can actually see here tabularly the relationship between this conceptual model to the logical model, and then from that logical model to multiple physical models. So this is captured when I publish it to the web portal. The web portal has the relationships between those diagrams defined inside of it. It's using ERwin's mappings, the ones that we introduced previously, to allow this relationship between the diagrams. And now what you can do is you can actually see a lineage report. So I can see a lineage report at a very high level. And over here we're seeing, for example, at a very, very high level, the conceptual model going to the logical and then to multiple physical implementations. And so we see that here. But more powerfully is the ability of having granular lineage for objects. So if I actually open up this logical model, and as you would expect in this type of tool, you have a graphical representation of the model as well. Of course, that's something that your users will be able to play with. But in the browser, I actually have the ability of, for example, locating this order table, and I can trace the lineage, not in the model, but in this configuration, this multiple models. And what happens here, let me just maximize my display. We now see that there is this relationship from my conceptual order table through this logical display. I can see the relationship between the few shared attributes that are here, and then, of course, as they flow all the way down to the physical. If I click on any of the relationship lines between these actual columns, and I look at the properties here, I can actually see the properties for the mapping from one location to the next. So the ability of actually seeing that information propagating between your diagrams. So it's a very useful way of getting that out in front of users. I can see where does this structure propagate throughout my design. I can see the arrows showing that flow of logic, so it's from conceptual to logical to multiple physicals. And then I can actually publish this conveniently. I can either print it out, or I can actually get this URL, which automatically gets selected, and I can actually publish that out to my business users so that they can come here and navigate to the same view of this data lineage. So you can imagine if I've actually captured like some logic between this, I can actually see it here as part of the properties that I'd have an operation defined here as well, which is actually not defined, but you can imagine that for data warehousing, some kind of transformation, you can have an operation defined here as well. So this is just, using the standard design layers. I'm deriving a logical from conceptual, deriving multiple physical models from logical, but then how do I trace that at a granular level? How do I see that at the model level, but then how do I see that at the object level, right? So for users who need to, whether it's an MDM initiative or whether you just need to get this information out to your application development team, how do you actually see this flow of data and get the correct information? So that's one example. The next example I want to show you is that data warehousing example that I mentioned before. And I'm actually going to close this. I'm actually going to log this user out and log in as a different user. This particular user is actually the administrator. So they have many more permissions, but they also have access to a different model, which is the one I want to show you. And I actually want to show you this MART example here. And this is a dimensional model, and if I actually look at the diagram visualization, I see the dimensional display as I expected to see it from before. And I just have my fact table surrounded by some dimensions. Let me just zoom out. And similarly to like I saw in the previous example, we actually have the ability of tracing lineage within the diagram. And this is slightly different in the way it actually displays. But for example, if I go to my, if I go to a table and I look at my sales fact table and I show the lineage in this configuration of models, I see a different type of view than I saw before because this is not a derived model. We're not going from a traditional logical to physical to, physical, or I should say logical to physical implementation or to multiple physical implementations. In this case, I have a dimensional design, and I'm really concerned about what are the data sources on this dimensional design. So in this particular case, I see my fact table is actually deriving some of its columns. Some of them are just migrating. Some of them, like this pay amount, is actually split into sales count and sales total money. It's actually being used in multiple locations. And alternately, like order count is actually deriving from store ID and order number. And a nice feature about this, by the way, is when I actually go and I look at the order count properties, if I click on it, I actually see the the two columns that are being used, order number, store ID. If I click on this order number, for example, I see the data type and all the properties for that particular source column. Once again, if I go back here and I click on store ID, I can see that it's a completely different data type here, but I can see the properties there. And more importantly is down in this lower pane here, or lowest pane down here, I haven't actually defined any transformational logic, but if I had captured that transformational logic in the ERwin diagram, it would also publish here as well. So this is like another really convenient way of getting this information out to your ETL team or to your BI team, depending on what your diagram represents. So another a key feature in once again using an additional layer of usage going beyond what we saw as far as having that information not only in the ERwin diagrams, all the value you have there as far as like defining this relationship from target to source. If you're already capturing these in diagrams, why not show your users the relationship between those diagrams and then actually capturing it here within the portal and publishing it as well. So with that, I'm going to take your questions. Hopefully we have some. I'm going to go back to my diagram here, or I should say back to my slides here. That was the demonstration part of it. A couple of housekeeping things, or just kind of a couple of key pointers I want to mention before we wrap up and take any questions you may have. Is first of all, ERwin.com. So if you're not using ERwin.com, great resource for anybody who does any data modeling, even if you're not using ERwin currently, just a great resource in general for, downloading latest versions of the software, opening support tickets, participating in a really, really active user community, There's a link here to the LinkedIn group that has over 2,000 members, I believe, at this point. And in that LinkedIn group, there's a lot of active discussions about, pain points ERwin users are having, maybe out-of-the-box ways of using the software. And, of course, as, the web portal functionality evolves and usage, picks up, this is going to be the central place where everybody's going to have those conversations. There's also a webinar series there that you may want to participate in. They have educational videos and other topics as well. Expert bloggers, a lot of really good, useful information. So, I'm done selling the website to you guys. It's a really useful resource. I participate there very frequently, so if you haven't been there, definitely check it out. Next action I would recommend, there is, if you want to reach out to us, there's the availability of a web portal evaluation at the end of this presentation. It is simply a cloud version of the web portal, but if you want to play around with it, if you're curious to see how it works, how do you generate your reports on the fly, how do you distribute them among your team members, and how do you get that usage in place, you can actually register for that at the end of this presentation, and you'll just get some links and user IDs and logins and passwords. If you're very curious about the web portal, check out my previous webinar. It's available from also at the end of this presentation. There's a list of all the previous topics. You can register for any of the replays of that topic for the web portal and also for data warehousing. So there's actually a webinar that I did last year, about a year ago at this point, maybe slightly more, which covered the topic of data warehousing functionality in much greater detail, and also that the design layer topic that I introduced today. Also follow me on Twitter or on LinkedIn. We have a group called Maximum Data Modeling. If you just do a Google search for Maximum Space Data Space Modeling, you'll find all of these social media channels, and you can reach me via any of those channels. If you have any questions, please, if we don't get to cover your questions today, or if you don't ask any questions today, we can cover the topic on the greater detail. Just reach out to me. And with that, we're going to see if we have any questions. I'm going to put us all on hold for just a moment and see. Please feel free to ask any questions if you do have any, and we'll be right back with you. You just type in, any questions you may have, just type them into the Q&A section to the right of your display.
Okay, well, we want to thank everybody for attending. We don't see any questions. If you would like to contact us, please do by email at info@techextend.com or by phone in the U.S., 800-221-7710. In Canada, 888-423-2700. And Sarah's telling me we do have one question, so we will we'll take that question and then wish everybody a good afternoon. Thank you. Can you so the question we have is whether we can map from a physical model to an XML. There is not currently that level of support for natively supporting the XML model. What ERwin can do is in the ERwin tool set itself. Let me actually. I won't. Can you map from a physical relational model to XML? What you can actually do is, let me just do a quick share of the ERwin on my desktop again. ERwin has the ability, and once again, it's representing this in a relational design. ERwin has the ability of importing, and this is, once again, this is from under File, and you can go to your Import from External Format.
And when we go here, you actually have the ability of specifying that this is an XML type. You can specify what type of XML you want to generate, or UML. So you actually have the ability of specifying you see there's many different data types you can actually import and export here. This is something oftentimes that users aren't aware of either. For example, you can actually import from Essbase Hyperion. That's a request we had recently. But there are many bridges here to MicroStrategy, to many different BI tools, to, of course, Cognos, to ETL tools, and other, to Microsoft's SSIS solutions. So many different opportunities here. But the point being that you do have the ability of, for example, importing and exporting those XML files into an ERwin diagram. ERwin's going to represent them in a kind of a funky format when you look at that XML mapping, considering it's not a true XML modeling tool. However, it will represent it as best it can, and then you can take that imported model and then map it to a physical model. So that's what my suggested technique would be. So first, import, like we just saw there, import your XML as an ERwin diagram. Make sure you notate it, that this is actually like a ERwin representation of that XML, and you'll see it will be non-relational to a large extent. Well, depending on what your design looks like, it may be non-relational. And then you're going to actually go and use your design layers to create the linkage between your physical model and that XML model. And now, in the web portal side, if you happen to be using the web portal side, you can see the relationship. If you're not using the web portal side, you can still generate a report, which could be useful to your end users. And that's another strategy that, really off topic for today. But there is a technique that you can cover there. But, most powerfully, if you are using the web portal, is being able to see that one-to-one correlation there and, of course, publishing it out to your team members. So that would be the strategy I would suggest. And I think that's the only question we have. So thank you for attending. Thank you for the questions. Reach out to me with any follow-up questions if any of you happen to have any. And we'll look forward to talking to you again next time we have another webinar. Thanks, everybody.